Hi, this is Jackie Callan, the First Lady of Boxing, and I listen to the Ringside Boxing Show. I hope you guys do too.
Live from Monterey on California's beautiful Central Coast, this is the Ringside Boxing Show. I'm Dennis Taylor, welcoming you to join me and my expert analysts, Travis Hartman, Rizwaan, Zahid, and John J. Raspanti, today and every week for the hottest, sweatiest show on the West Coast. And now, from Studio 1A, it's the Ringside Boxing Show.
Welcome to the Ringside Boxing Show on the Gruel and True Sports Network. I'm Dennis Taylor, and we got another trip in the Wayback Machine for you today. A short time from now, our boxing historian, Christopher James Shelton, is going to transport us back to the late 1780s. You heard me right, the late 1780s, when the king of bare-knuckle boxing in England was a fellow by the name of Daniel Mendoza, who was a fascinating character who led a very interesting life during a time when men were men and they didn't wear gloves when they fought. That's coming up in just a bit. Paul McLaughlin, our British correspondent, is also standing by to tell us what's been going on in the United Kingdom in recent days. He's got some stuff about the heavyweight division over there. And, of course, we're going to be joined right now by our expert analyst. Travis Hartman is a professional boxer, trainer, and promoter from Osborne, Missouri, now living and training in Orlando, Florida. Rizwaan Zahid is a boxing journalist from Toronto. And John J. Raspanti is chief lead writer for MaxBoxing.com and DogHouseBoxing.com. And John and I are co-authors of Intimate Warfare, the true story of the Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward boxing trilogy, which was an Amazon bestseller. And John Raspanti, you rickety, decrepit, decomposing old bag of geezer bones, how was that 60th birthday? Let me just guess, okay? Early bird dinner, old Philip Marlowe movie on TV, you took your meds, got into your jammies, you went to bed. Am I right?
Not too far away, Dennis. Early dinner, true. We watched Duck Soup by the Marx Brothers, 1933. You and me were around then, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was 21.
Yeah, there you go. So, and then we actually stayed up a little later than usual because Dove had never seen it, and since it was a little past Halloween, she had to wait to around Halloween. So we watched it last night, and went to bed. So that's it. You're not too far away. You know?
I vaguely remember being that spry at some point in my life, or did I just dream it? I don't know.
Probably dreamed it, but probably dreamed it.
I'm so envious of you, John.
I know. You better be nice, Travis, because when you turn 60, just remember, if you're not nice, Dennis and I are going to come back and haunt you. So
that's right. That's right.
I feel like that's already going to happen anyways.
Well, you know what? 60. You're going to turn 60 about the day after tomorrow. It's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Fast, doesn't it, John?
I look at it, Dennis. I look at it like I look in my rearview mirror, and I was 30, and then I look again, and I'm 40 and 50, and now I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. I was just 30 2 minutes ago. It's stunning.
And poor Riz is complaining that he's lost all his hair. Is that right?
Well, I lost my hair years ago, man. You guys are in your 60s and 70s and going on 80, and you guys still have your hair. So I don't know. I don't know which one's better.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, let's talk about the World Boxing Super Series, guys. A couple of really interesting outcomes yesterday. The weird one being Nonito Donaire's upset win over Ryan Burnett. It was technically a fourth-round TKO. Burnett missed with a right hand and then suddenly took a knee and he clutched his lower back, and he managed to get up and finish the round, but he couldn't come out for the fifth. So Donaire kind of sheepishly, I think, moves on to the semifinal round of the WBSS bantamweight tournament, where he's going to face WBO title holder Zolani Tete, who is 28-3 with 21 knockouts. Riz, when I first heard that Donaire had won, I was excited because I know him and I like him. He's an easy guy to root for, and what a big win for him at age 36. And in his first fight at bantamweight in 7 years, But when I found out how it ended, it's a really empty feeling for me because it's really no result at all. Burnett gets his first loss of his career due to some bad luck. Donaire moves on, but I think he realizes he didn't earn it. The semifinal against Tete is an asterisk fight, I think, because Donaire got there with a free pass. But, hey, that I guess. You know, you can't control what you can't control. Not Donaire's fault. What do you think of his chances going forward, man?
To be honest, against Tete, I think he has a very, very good chance. I think the one thing Donaire had going for him in this tournament was his experience. No one's been on the level that he's been at. No one has fought the quality of opposition that he has. Because he's been in, you know, he was kind of the up-and-comer like 10 years ago. So he's been around for a really long time, a lot longer than people actually remember. Like when he beat, I think when his big claim to fame was when he beat Vic Darchinyan. I want to say he was 25 at the time, give or take, 26. Like it was quite a while ago, right? Like we're going back, you know, we're going back many years. We're going back to 2007, so that's 11 years ago, all right? So he was, so he wasn't. I think he wasn't even 25 yet. He was turning 25. So you know, he's seen everything so far. And I think Burnett obviously was a hard fight for him because Burnett is kind of the opposite. He's 10 years younger, slick boxer, and all that. I think against a guy like Tete, though, Tete has shown some incredible pop at times, but he's never fought anyone like Nonito Donaire. So I think in some ways this might have been the hardest fight for Donaire, but he got the W, and he's moving on. And because of that, I think it's not inconceivable to think that he'll be in the finals and he'll have a good chance in the finals. I think in so many ways it's very similar to the way Groves was in the finals. George Groves was kind of the more experienced guy, but a lot of people didn't really expect him to go far in the tournament. But because he's, you know, the guy who's been around longer, he managed to pull off a couple of wins that a lot of people thought that maybe he wouldn't, and he ends up in the finals. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing with Donaire here. I don't think anyone expected him to go this far, because Tete's last couple fights after his 11-second knockout back in last November, almost pretty much a year ago till now, his couple fights since he hasn't looked great, and so his power's kind of, it shows that he has power, but he won't knock out everyone. And Donaire, for the most part, always showed a pretty solid chin. It was only at higher divisions that he struggled. So I don't think it's inconceivable to think that Donaire can pull off an upset against Tete and go to the finals. I think he has a much better chance of doing that than he did it being Ryan Burnett. And despite the way it happened, he got the W. So, you know, he did. I think he has a much better chance of beating Tete because as much as, you know, Tete's powers kind of feared people, he didn't knock out Omar Narvaez, and Narvaez went the distance with Donaire years ago, but then he went up against Inoue, who completely blew him out of the water. So I think there's a real good if I'm a betting man, I don't know what the betting odds are, but I got to think that Donaire's probably going to end up moving on. I think he has I just think he has the experience, and Tete is not what Burnett offered, which was youth and a hostile crowd behind him. He doesn't have those kind of advantages. So yeah, I think you know, it's really early to say. And it doesn't really seem like Donaire's really beaten anyone either in the last couple of years. But I think this is the best chance Donaire's going to have to move anywhere in any sort of capacity in his career and whatever's left. So I think he wins. I think he wins this fight, and I think he's going to the finals.
Okay, so Travis, you're a professional boxer. Nonito said, you know, a win is a win. But if you're Donaire, do you kind of keep this title belt in a box in your basement, or at least tuck it in the far corner of your trophy case, because it's not one of the guys. It really doesn't belong with the others.
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one, because as a fighter, he prepared for this fight like you would have prepared for any fight. So all of the work really done for these fights are done in the training. You know, the fight is the easy part for the most part, so to speak. And this one, by all means, guys, this fight was a close fight. This fight was not, Burnett did not have this fight in the bag by watching those first, 3 rounds. This was a really competitive, close fight. And by all means, I think Donaire still has it. I don't think Riz is far off on his prediction either. I think Donaire is just as good of a chance of winning this as anything. Because two things, Burnett was the number 1 seed. So to knock off the number 1 seed, no matter how you did it, you still did it. And two, Burnett, this is just perspective on how Donaire is the veteran. Donaire had more knockouts than Burnett has fights.
Yeah,
I mean, that was the experience level right there, just to show you how much experience Donaire. And Donaire, by all means, usually when we talk about fighters with experience, we talk about fighters with experience, and it makes them seem like they're really old and they're shot. I don't think Donaire is shot, and I think at 118 pounds, Donaire is viable. And by all means, watching that fight, Donaire did not look like he'd lost a step, did not look like he'd lost any fire. And by all means, his chin was there because Burnett caught him a couple of really clean times, I believe, in the second round, and Donaire just not only just shook it off, he came back and was still fighting. So I think Donaire is still hungry. I think Donaire still has it, and this win, I don't think it's tainted because I don't think Burnett was blowing him away. If Burnett was blowing him away, in 3 or 4 rounds and almost had him knocked out and then hurt himself, then yeah, we could say that. But I don't think Burnett, by all cases, had Donaire blown away at all. I thought this was a very close and competitive fight. It was only 4 rounds, so the fight hadn't really got started, so to speak. But I think that it doesn't taint it as bad as it would if Donaire was getting his butt kicked, because we've seen that before where fighters been getting their butts absolutely kicked and then somehow the other guy wins by DQ or something strange happens, and that didn't happen here. He did hurt himself, but I don't think it taints it too terribly bad because Donaire was in the fight. This fight was by all means still up for grabs and still winnable by Donaire, and Donaire was fighting very well, and Burnett's a good fighter. Watching that fight, that's kind of the first time I've ever really seen Burnett fight in person live, and not in person, but in live. And he impressed me. The guy can fight. The guy knows how to fight, and I wish we would have seen more of that fight. And to me, guys, I don't know Burnett that well, but when I watched that, the injury looked really weird. It almost looked like a spasm or something, because he did finish the round, but then when he went back and sat down, him and his coach were having these weird conversations, like quietly away from the microphone. And I didn't understand what was going on. And then when they called it, Burnett almost wanted to get up and kind of walk around, which kind of, I don't know, it threw me off a little bit because I was like, if you couldn't even finish a fight, because of your back, and now you're trying to get up and walk around, and I don't know. I really don't know. I just question a little bit. I want to see what really happened. I'm sure something happened, but I just kind of question the injury a little bit, thinking that if he could have finished or what, but I'm not really sure what happened. I haven't seen the official diagnosis of it yet, but to me, it looked like he could finish. I don't know. Maybe I'm in the minority by saying that, but to me, it kind of looked like it did, and definitely left a little bit of a tainted version for the win. But still, it's a sucky way to lose your world title, but it is what it is.
Man, you know what? If something slipped in his back, if a vertebra slipped, that is agony, and sometimes you can get up and walk around with that, but man, I can't even imagine him finishing that round, which he did. So you could be right, but yeah, if that was So Travis, I want to stick with you for one more. This was his first fight, Donaire's first fight in 7 years at 118 pounds. What do you suspect is the challenge for him to make that weight still, and what's it going to be to have to do it 2 more times?
You know what? To me, it was really shocking to me, though, how his body didn't look depleted. He didn't look any less strong, and I don't know. It didn't look like I don't know how he made that weight, and the way he made it, he must have did it very healthy because, like I said, his punches still looked like they had a lot of pop. He looked like he wasn't just training to make weight, if that makes sense. It looked like he was training to win a fight, and he still had the pop on his punches. He still had the chin. He still had everything going for him. So whatever he's doing to make that weight, good for him because it looked like he made it, and he did it in a healthy way because most fighters you see when they go down that much weight after steadily moving up to higher weight classes and they come back down, later in their career especially, I mean, that's where you've seen Roy Jones. Roy Jones did that. When Roy Jones went up to heavyweight and then came back down, he got knocked out by Antonio Tarver. And then the rest of his career kind of was depleted after that, it seemed. So when fighters go up and then they come back down, usually you see them struggle in their careers. But I know it was only 4 rounds, but I thought Donaire looked very healthy, looked very strong. He didn't look depleted. His face didn't. His body didn't. So, all power to him. Whatever he's doing, it looks like he's doing it right. But again, it could be premature because we've only seen 4 rounds out of 12 rounds. Maybe if it got into the later rounds, we could see how the weight drop took it out of him. But we couldn't really see that because it was only 4 rounds. So this next fight could be very telling, how he makes that 118-pound limit.
Okay, so John, you've got an article on MaxBoxing.com about Josh Taylor's TKO win over Ryan Martin, the 7th round. That was the WBSS Super Lightweight Tournament, 130 pounds. And you were real impressed. Josh Taylor is the real thing. And now he's on his way to Ivan Baranchyk, who's 19-0 with 12 knockouts. And the winner of that face either Kiryl Relikh or Regis Prograis. Ooh la la, what a fight that'll be. Tell us how Taylor looked, and then talk about his road ahead for us.
Okay, I just want to say one thing though about Burnett. He did leave the ring on a stretcher, and he did kind of collapse in the corner. Now, if you want to not believe that or whatever, but he did look, and you and I, Dennis, we were just talking about this. We have had back problems because we're old and rickety, as we said, but that is true about the back. You know, it can hit you, and then whatever, you can feel like, oh, okay, maybe I can move around a little, and boom, you get hit with another spasm, and you go down. And he looked like he went down very abruptly to me. So whatever he did, and he said he couldn't throw his right hand. So the way Donaire was popping and with some of those shots, I think it would have been pretty difficult to hang around against Donaire, because he did look pretty crisp for a guy almost 36 years old, and he impressed me too, even though the way I thought it was going, Travis, was that if he stayed in the center of the ring, speaking about Burnett here, and moved like he did, he probably would have been able to outbox Donaire and win by decision. He only had 7 knockouts, so I couldn't see him stopping him. But the minute he got into the ropes and Donaire was being very aggressive, he was letting those thudding bombs go. And as we know, Donaire can really punch, and he hit Burnett with a right hand near the end of the round that he absorbed it, but you know he felt it. So it would have been like that. I think Burnett would have probably won the decision, but, you know, you are right. The fight was very close. But the back, if anybody's ever hurt their back, it is the worst thing in the world. Your legs feel all weird. You're kind of vibrating. It's a strange thing. And the kid looked totally devastated to me, and it was unfortunate. Yeah, Josh Taylor, man, you know, Ryan Martin came in 22-0, 12 knockouts. Dennis, he didn't seem intimidated by Josh Taylor, but I got the feeling he was intimidated by the whole enormity of the event. You know, he looked like a deer in the headlights in a way, to use a popular cliche. He just looked like he just couldn't get off, you know, but of course part of it was that Josh Taylor was just, I mean, the kid was primed. I mean, he was confident. He would move in and throw combinations to the head and body and then move away. I mean, he was having fun in there. He gets better and better every fight. And the announcer made a good point, Dennis. He asked him about the Victor Postel fight, and that was a tough one for Josh Taylor, because he was losing that fight in the first 5 or 6 rounds, but he came on, he dug down deep, and he finished really well and staggered Postel and won that fight. And I think that really did him a lot of good. You know, over the years we've spoken about, Travis has mentioned this, where a fighter has to a young fighter has to have those moments where he gets tested, and that's where he learns about himself. And I think he's better. He was better anyway, but I think he leaped even further up because of that fight, and he showed it. Now, it's too bad that Martin didn't put up more of an effort, but I think he was trying the last few rounds, but Taylor just overwhelmed him. You know, it was one of those things, and you could tell he was just, when he walked back to the corner, he was just shaking his head, you know, and Abel Sanchez was like, come on, you know, you got to get going. And you could tell Martin was like, yeah, I know, I'm trying. Every time I'm going to throw it or do this, I got fast hands. I can't touch him, and he keeps beating me to the punch. So I was really impressed, yeah. And his next fight against the tough Baranchyk, whoa, that kid is such a tough kid. And then he probably beat him because he can do both, Josh Taylor. He can box and he can punch, and Baranchyk more looks like a brawler in a way, and he can absorb it, but he's going to have to catch Josh with some shots to get him to stop moving. And he's going to have to do the same thing Donaire was doing to Burnett in a way, back him into the ropes and pound on him, but I don't think Taylor will mind, but he's very athletic. And then, of course, the mouth-watering showdown, if it gets to that, and I believe it will, against the Rougarou.
Yeah.
That one, I was just thinking about that one when I was watching the fight. Yeah, I was like, oh, my gosh, you know how the Rougarou is with his bobbing and weaving and then popping and moving, and he's got a lot of game, and so does Taylor. That fight is a total toss-up. I mean, that would be that would be an unbelievable fight, I think, because they both want action. They don't want a stinker. They want to give the crowd their money's worth, and they like to fight. You know, they're going to throw shots. They're going to take chances. And, yeah, that one has me just totally, my mouth watering right now talking about it. That would be an incredible fight when it happens. I think it's going to happen because they're both that talented. They should be able to win their next few fights and meet each other in the final. And that this is another example of why these tournaments are so great for boxing, because we get what we want. You know, we want to see the best fight the best. And I think that's why boxing is getting more fans, because they're finally figuring it out. You know, you got to give the fans, if you want something to grow, you got to give the fans what they like, and even the casual fans want a fighter, a good fighter, and a good fighter. You don't want a good fighter and a not-so-good fighter that he blows them out in a round. You want a good, competitive fight, and they're doing it, and it's great for the sport and wonderful for us who are fans. It's great stuff.
Okay, well, Riz, meanwhile, Regis Prograis, the Rougarou, said this week that after he wins the WBSS, which he plans to do, his plan is to pursue a fight with Terence Crawford, hopefully at a catch weight, but he's also willing to go up and fight him at 147. Man, I love guys like the Rougarou and Mikey Garcia who are willing to put their perfect records on the line against a pound-for-pound guy who's at least one weight division higher. That's old school. That's Henry Armstrong stuff. They're daring to be great, as Max Kellerman says. But he's got to be a massive underdog if that match gets made, isn't he? Should he go up and fight Crawford?
Let's wait and see what happens in the World Super Series. I don't want to. I think a lot of the tournament will actually give my prediction, because I think, if he blows guys out of the water, if he goes up against like someone like Josh Taylor and he wins easily, then that's gonna, that'll affect my thinking probably a little bit. Because at the same time, I think we can all agree that whatever Prograis is probably fighting in the next couple of weeks, or the next couple of months and for the rest of the year, that's going to be much better competition than Crawford has faced in a while. Guys like Benavidez and with the exception of Ndongo, because at least Ndongo was one of those, was I think undefeated at the time too. But you know what? Prograis went up against him and blew him out even quicker. So I think Crawford's really in a rock and a hard place, because there's no urgency to make a fight with Porter or Thurman or Spence. So he's kind of left in the dark. And Prograis, I think, kind of in some ways has like numerous options here. I think Prograis. I think there's a reason why Prograis said Crawford and didn't say any of the other guys he could have mentioned. Now I'm wondering, is there Prograis has been on ESPN before, so maybe there's an easier connection there. But I think there's a reason why he mentioned Crawford, because I think the other three guys are really big welterweights, right? Mm-hmm. Spence, I think all of them have actually, I believe all of them actually started their careers above welterweight, if I'm not mistaken. With the exception, I think Porter has weighed at least 150 and above for a few fights.
I know Thurman 160, yeah.
Thurman was pretty much Thurman before the fight with Marcos Maidana. He was weighing at 150 and up for pretty much every one of these fights. So before they found a way to kind of get him down to welterweight, Errol Spence is a pretty big welterweight. So Crawford's the only one who's kind of new to that division, and I think is more as his natural weight. So I think that's why Prograis is maybe looking at him a little more. I don't know. It's an enticing matchup, and if Prograis wins this tournament, and I think that's a good fight to be made, because Crawford, to me, he hasn't wowed me in a while, actually. It's actually been, and it's also, especially with the opponents he's fighting. I mean, Benavidez is not a bad fighter. He's a good fighter, but I mean, who knows how much the gunshots actually has affected his career. It's going to be hard to really pinpoint that. But he hasn't really had a marquee win before he even went up against Crawford. So I feel like a lot of the Crawford fights are kind of hype machine fights, but they're not fights that really show how great he is. So I think Prograis is definitely, he has something in mind. I think he understands. I think for him, Crawford's almost, I wouldn't say the end game, but Crawford's kind of the next, it's the big step, but he has to do all the little steps that's ahead. And I mean, they're not little steps. It's a massive tournament with some of the best boxers in the world. So I don't want to say it's not, it's not competitive, because it's not a foregone conclusion that he wins either. But if he does, then I think, he should definitely fight. He should definitely fight Crawford, because Crawford could have been in this tournament. I think it's actually quite similar to the original Super Six and how many top ranked fighters were not in there when they had the super middleweight tournament going on. And then meanwhile, while like guys like Froch and Boot and Ward and Kessler and all these guys were kind of battling out, there was not there wasn't a big top ranked fighter that was kind of in there. I think it's the same thing that's going on right now. You have some of the best guys in there, and think about the fights that were happening yesterday. We had with Josh Taylor and Burnett and Prograis and the guys he's going to be going up against, and exactly, and then and whatever the finals ends up being. But if you compare all of those fights to what Crawford has done in the last year or two, you got to say it's pretty underwhelming from Terrence. It's actually quite disappointing because he could have been in this tournament, and I think that's the big risk Andre Ward took in his career very early on. He entered the Super 6 pretty green, and no one knew who he was before that tournament. I think there's a lot of people who kind of knew who he was in boxing circles, and even though he never kind of really stepped out of the boxing circles, I think people understood how great he was, though. And I think that's kind of a really big missed opportunity from Terrence Crawford from not being in this tournament.
Okay, and Miguel Berchelt successfully defended his WBC super featherweight crown Saturday with a 9th-round TKO over Mickey Roman. Travis, did you get to see that one?
No, I didn't. I just saw some highlights of that one.
Okay. Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that Terrence Crawford hasn't really the level of competition that we would have liked, but by all means, he's impressed. Anybody that can.
You're breaking up a little bit, Travis. Walk to a different part of the room. Okay.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
There you
go.
Yeah, I was just saying the transcript for any guy that can knock out a guy in the 12th round of a title fight, an undefeated fighter at that, in the 12th round, that's impressive to me because you don't see knockouts at that elite level very much. Whether Benavidez was a worthy opponent or not, Benavidez was a big size difference. You can tell the way he was taking punches. So the fact that Terrence Crawford knocked him out in the 12th round, to me, that was impressive. And that's why I think Terrence Crawford still is great. Of course, I'm on the Terrence Crawford train, and I have been for a long time. But I think Terrence Crawford has impressed me. In his last fight, he impressed me. Like I said, with that 12th round knockout, to me, that was very impressive because by all means, Benavidez, was he a world-class, number one contender type? Probably not, but I think Benavidez was a top 10 bigger opponent who was undefeated going in and never lost before. So to me, that was very impressive with Crawford. And I kind of understand why Crawford didn't get in the tournament. None of the super elite pound-for-pound fighters have ever gotten these tournaments. And these tournaments are mainly for guys that really can't get that publicity, and they go out and they earn it by winning a tournament. And that's why Crawford's not in it because, he probably doesn't think he needs to earn it because he thinks he's already been there. And he really has. He's a top pound-for-pound fighter in the world. So one of these tournaments I don't think would help him much. He's kind of the king of the throne right now. He can kind of pick his fights, and I think the fight that anybody wants to see anyways is him and Errol Spence. So I don't think a tournament would do justice really for Terrence Crawford. For us fans, we would love it because for him to fight any of the guys in this tournament would be amazing, fan-friendly fights for sure. I still think Terrence Crawford would win them, but I'd rather see Terrence Crawford against other elites like an Errol Spence or guys like that.
John, did you get to see Berchelt fight Roman?
Unfortunately, I did not, Dennis. We were doing our very exciting birthday thing, so I also just saw highlights from what I read. It was a hell of a fight. I was sorry that I missed it, but Berchelt was a really tough guy, and from what like I said, what I saw and read, he looked very impressive.
Okay. Let me stay with you on this one, John. Eddie Hearn says a Wilder-Fury rematch is going to eliminate both fighters as a future opponent for Anthony Joshua. That's what he said. Can somebody explain to me where that will leave Anthony Joshua? Is the boxing world salivating over Joshua versus anybody else in 2019? White, Chisora, Big Baby, Brazil, Pulev, Usyk, Joe Joyce. Isn't he throwing away a king's ransom by blowing off a Fury-Wilder fight? Is this just talk on Hearn's part?
It's just talk, Dennis. You know what? And I'm going to say something that probably people in England won't like, or maybe Eddie Hearn's family won't like, but I really, really believe that Eddie Hearn, there is a part of him that does not want Anthony Joshua in the ring with Deontay Wilder.
I agree.
I just get that. I just get that feeling. Maybe it's based because a lot of what he says is malarkey. We know that, but the way he slips and slides and ducks about Deontay Wilder, I think he's afraid that Joshua's going to get hit with one of those right hands, and he's not going to get up like he did against Klitschko. So he's unhappy, but he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's kind of unhappy about, maybe even a little jealous about the Wilder Fury fight, but then he's salivating because he's thinking, look, the winner is going to get Joshua, but then if they're going to fight each other, I'm just going to tell them, you're out of the picture. He's just BSing. He's just talking because if Fury wins and then Wilder wins, either fight against Joshua is huge. So it's great. Again, it's
Totally.
great for the heavyweights. So he's just I don't know what he's smoking out there in London. I think, see, with him though, I don't think he says things just to be ridiculous. I think he's very calculating. And he's aware. He's not like Oscar, who says things where you just go, what? Eddie Hearn is more of a thinking man's promoter. He thinks ahead. He's projecting in his own mind, playing amateur psychologist here, what could happen. And again, though, I don't think it would make him too unhappy, though, if Joshua doesn't fight Deontay Wilder. I think he's going to be pulling for Fury. And even though Fury would also be a very difficult fight for Anthony Joshua because of his style. So he can say whatever he wants to say, but I still think Deontay Wilder scares him. And he's got his cash cow with Anthony Joshua. He could stay there in London and draw $80,000 when he fights just about anybody. So there's just a little bit of a wariness, and I'm glad you saw that too, or feel that too, because there's just something there that I sense. But yeah, back to your original question, I think he's just blowing smoke and playing the promoter. You know, in 2 weeks he might say something totally opposite, and it's just like a politician again. You know, where they figure you forgot what he said 2 weeks ago. But you know, with us that are into the boxing thing, we're gonna go, wait. You just said. But that's why I don't take a lot of what he says seriously. What I do take seriously, again, that I feel in my bones that he is concerned about Joshua fighting Wilder, and he can blame Wilder's side all he wants, but I think it was him playing hardball more that caused that fight to fall through, not Wilder. I think Wilder wanted that fight desperately, but he lowballed him, and how can you blame him? So I don't blame Wilder at all. So it's all Eddie Hearn.
Riz or Travis, that's exactly the vibe that I get. I feel like Eddie Hearn is being kind of like a helicopter mother. He's being overprotective of a favorite child here. If he sits on Wilder Fury until it becomes, Juanma Gamboa, which is a fight that's penciled in for November now, but should have happened 8 or 9 years ago, fans are not going to be happy. How do you feel, Riz, about what John just said about that?
I think he's right in the sense that Hearn does not say anything without being calculated. He's not. Look, listen, Eddie Hearn has always been a pretty smart business guy, and he's made good money for his fighters. He made good money as a business, but that doesn't happen without being calculated. I think he has probably a closer connection to Joshua than most promoter-fighter relationships go. But at the same time, I think he understands that his job is to, get the most amount of money for his fighter. And I think he understands, he's going to do the most amount to make the most financial sense for his fighter too. So I think in some ways they're trying to I think it's still just all part of the negotiations, to be honest. I think they wanted to make sure that the fight happens in England and they're going to get the most amount of money doing that, or vice versa. I think they're trying to figure out essentially what's best. I think at this point, it's not going to happen in the States. Wilder said he's willing to come to England. I think in some ways, if Fury wins, I don't think a Fury loss is really damning to any fighter, especially, if it's just you lose a decision. I think a knockout is the kind of fight. It's a kind of a knockout is something that could completely derail a career. We've seen that, a billion times. But with Tyson Fury, if he beats you, it's going to be through slick boxing. It's not going to be a Hopkins Pavlik sort of scenario, right? Like when Fury beat Klitschko, Klitschko, obviously he had a lot of things going on at that time, but when he fought Joshua, no one, people still gave him a chance in the fight for obvious reason. If it was the other way around, no one would want to see Klitschko against Fury necessarily after he got knocked out. So I think that's the difference between the two. I think let's face it, I think with Wilder it's a risk because Wilder can knock out everyone, but you also know the vulnerabilities of Wilder, and realistically someone else could beat him first, and then you don't have to deal with that problem. I don't know if that's the way they're looking at it, because I view it as the other way around. I think Wilder is so beatable that you can get to him first and make more money doing it than anyone else would. So I think that makes more sense for Joshua to pursue that fight. I think they're still looking at May. I think that's still, people thought it would happen by the end of this year, and I think it should have. because again, we expect Wilder to beat Fury, but I think it's a big assumption to just assume that Wilder's going to be able to land on Fury at some point. I think he's going to be able to, but Fury's not stupid, man. I mean, he says some stupid stuff, but he's not. He has a very high boxing IQ, and if you look at, I tell everyone, go look at some of his interviews when he breaks down other fighters, stuff he has doesn't have a vetted interest in, and you'll see his knowledge of the game. I mean, when I was there last year when Billy Joe Saunders absolutely schooled David Lemieux, and I saw Fury there, big man. And I saw some of his interviews after, and he was just breaking it down, and he was just saying, everyone should have saw this coming, right? So his knowledge of boxing, despite the stupid stuff he has said and has done, it doesn't, he has more knowledge than I think Wilder will ever acquire. Does that equate a win? That's another question. But if it does, then that completely derails a Wilder-Joshua fight for a while, and Wilder has no business asking for any money, and Wilder's going to really have to get into the mix because Wilder doesn't have the backing that Joshua does. He doesn't have an entire nation behind him. There's very few people who know what Deontay Wilder is. We have to that's the reality. He's not, where America's champion before was, Tyson and Holyfield. That's not who Wilder is. Until he needs Joshua a lot more than Joshua needs Wilder. I think Joshua wants to fight. I think his legs. I think he cares about those things. But a promoter's job is to make him the most amount of money. I mean, he's beat Povetkin. I don't think they're at the desperation stop yet. He'll beat Povetkin. I feel like he'll fight Luis Ortiz soon enough. He'll probably fight the winner of White and Chisora, which is coming up soon. So there's a lot of options for him. But again, it's more on Wilder to make the fight because he's getting older too. And if you're Wilder, you got to make the fight now. Even if you have to sacrifice a little money at the door, the long-term gain you get for making a win is way better. And there's no other fights that Wilder's going to make that's going to generate the amount of income he would get against Joshua. So I think both sides are playing the negotiation game, but I still think, unfortunately, it's Wilder. Whether right or wrong, I think he's the one who's losing.
Travis, if you've got more to say on this topic, feel free. I also want to throw another one at you, though, because Eddie Hearn and Canelo fired a shot at Golovkin a couple weeks ago, saying there's no chance for a third Canelo-Golovkin fight unless Golovkin joins DAZN, the DAZN stable. And it looks like that worked. Tom Loeffler and Hearn are negotiating right now. And I guess what remains to be seen is whether Hearn's mini monopoly on all these great fighters is going to be a good thing for the sport or a bad thing. Is it a positive thing for so many top fighters to be under one guy's umbrella, one guy's thumb? So, jump on either one of those or both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think both ways. They both involve Hearn, and I think Hearn is a smart businessman. And to be honest, yeah, it is very smart. If he can get Triple G over there, then he can make good fights, which is Triple G and Canelo. So I like it because he's not trying to avoid the big fights. He's trying to make them happen under his own brand, and it's very smart. And the Anthony Joshua one, let's be honest, Anthony Joshua is Eddie Hearn's cash cow. That's the biggest marketing and has, and that's probably why Eddie Hearn got DAZN. And let's be all honest, because he had Anthony Joshua selling out 90,000-seat arenas and bringing in all of this money for the last couple of years. So he for sure got that DAZN investment because of a guy like Anthony Joshua. So I think he's trying to protect him. I really do. I think that he's definitely, I don't know if he's scared, but I just think he's trying to protect his investment because the risk more is very little, because if he loses to Wilder, it'll probably be by knockout, because Wilder's not outboxing Anthony Joshua. And if Wilder can catch Anthony Joshua and knock him out, it's very possible, because we saw Klitschko put Anthony Joshua down. But Anthony Joshua does have heart, and Anthony Joshua has charisma, has stamina, has it all. So he might necessarily lose to Wilder, but I think we're all skipping something there, and that's Tyson Fury is going to derail all of this. I'm telling you, Tyson Fury is going to beat Deontay Wilder, and he's going to throw a wrench into all of this mess. And this is what's going to happen. Tyson Fury is going to beat Deontay Wilder, and it's going to be a boring snooze fest, and Deontay Wilder's clan is going to say, oh, he ran, he did this, he held, blah, blah, blah. So I think Anthony Joshua is going to decline to fight Tyson Fury, because it'll be the same awkward, boring fight. And I think they will end up fighting Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua, because I think they'll Tyson Fury because he's a boring style. He always has been. But I think Tyson Fury is going to beat Deontay Wilder. As much as I don't want it to happen because I want my American Deontay Wilder to win, I don't think he's going to win.
Okay. All right. Well, how about Canelo and Golovkin? Golovkin's going to sign with DAZN. It looks like maybe.
Yeah, I mean that's a smooth move by Eddie Hearn again. You can't get any better than that. If you can attract a guy like Golovkin to come over to DAZN, DAZN is already saturating the market and signing up all these big time fighters. It's a smart move. Eddie Hearn, but everybody's agreed with this that he's a very calculating, smart guy, and he definitely is. He latched on to somebody like Anthony Joshua, and he grew that guy and made him the brand that he is, and has taken matchroom boxing, through the roof. And now it's DAZN who's coming over, invading the American market now, and it's really taking over boxing. And I think it has become a monopoly, and it's a good monopoly because Eddie Hearn's not trying to get all these fighters to protect them. He's trying to get all these fighters under his state so he can fight them all with each other, which is great for boxing, which is great for guys like us who are huge fans. And I think we're going to see great fights because of DAZN and Eddie Hearn. And also, it creates that competitive market to where now Al Heyman and Showtime and everybody else in ESPN, they're going to have to keep up with those massive, elite, blockbuster type of fights. And we're going to start seeing blockbuster fights, every month, I would hope. And that would be amazing right now because boxing, it is flourishing. And we are getting to the point to where every month we should probably have nice, competitive, great fights, and that's thanks to Eddie Hearn creating that competition right now.
John, Khan versus Brook, is this one going to happen? And has it already outlived its shelf life a little bit?
I think it'll happen. It has outlived its shelf life, but I think it'll still probably happen. Khan needs it desperately. He needs one more big fight, I think, for himself. Brook, too, in a way, because he had his comeback fight. He won. Khan had his comeback. His second fight was a little harder. It's probably too late in a way as far as they are concerned in their primes, but it's still a good matchup. It still should be a heck of a fight. So one thing that people forget sometimes, even if a fight is late sometimes, as far as the fighters go, doesn't mean that the fight won't be really good. It depends on the matchup. Now, I'm hoping that it's a good matchup, but I'm thinking back in the past when a good matchup and the guys that might be a little past their prime, how the fight is just very competitive. So I'm thinking that Khan brings his roller coaster flaws in, and Brook has had his issues. So they're both a little flawed and maybe a little fragile in some respects now, but they're both also very good fighters. So I think it will happen next year. Khan is always he's always like his own promoter, and he's another guy that says things sometimes that I just roll my eyes and go, look, Amir, you've got so much talent, but you just say some things that you just want to say, take him aside and go, just don't say anything, or if you are, just get vanilla, say something just like, I think I'll beat him or something. Don't go into all the other stuff because it just makes you look silly. But I think he's going to push for it hard, and Kel's got a lot of pride. So yeah, I do think it happens.
Okay, Riz, Pacquiao versus Broner. I'm going to watch that as long as it doesn't cost me anything. Are you interested in that fight?
I don't know. I'll watch it just because I think, style-wise, I think it could be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. Pacquiao signed with. No one really expected that signing, but I guess there's only so many Broners on that roster, so I don't know who else he would fight unless he's going to fight the top guys. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this fight if he wins. What I'm more aggravated at, there's so many other fighters who deserve that payday and that attention to fight Manny Pacquiao than Broner. Errol Spence, Thurman, pretty much absolutely everyone. I think Porter would be like a great fight. Porter's a former sparring partner of Pacquiao when he was really on his way up at young, and there was heated sparring sessions, and they said it was competitive and it was good. I think that I would much rather see that than anything else. I don't really have a lot of interest in Broner out of everyone else, but it's not I don't think it's a bad fight at all. But Broner, I think the real drawback of Broner, he hasn't been an entertaining fighter in quite a while. He used to be a pretty entertaining fighter, at least, even when he was, even when he was not fulfilling his potential. But now, I mean, I think I don't know, he's probably 28 or something like that. He's still fairly young, but I feel like he's almost like a 40-year-old now. I just think he's the best of his. I think his prime years are so much past him. I think he's just complete lack of preparation, a lack of discipline in between fights has just taken such a massive toll on his career. And that's where, again, like, people have their opinions of Mayweather, which is a lot of it's fair, obviously. No one can ever doubt Mayweather's work ethic and how it put it. Like, it's actually amazing how many distractions Mayweather constantly had in between fights, and somehow it never ever perfected a performance of his, like, ever. And it shows just the focus he still had on his career, despite some unnecessary drama that was kind of going on. So I don't think that is what Broner is. So I think it's interesting to see what Pacquiao has left, because I mean, even a Broner who's still not very good is still significantly better than a lot of the guys Pacquiao's faced over the last few years. So I do want to see him. And to be honest, I don't really have a game or a horse in the race here. But I do hope Pacquiao absolutely destroys Broner, and because I do want to see how guys like Errol Spence and Thurman and Porter, how they would handle a guy with that experience of Pacquiao, because he still provides a lot of issues in terms of speed and movement, and as a veteran, I think he can still cause a lot of problems, even if he's 80% of what he was. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a slap in the face to all the fighters under that stable who are obviously clearly better, who are clearly just better people too. So I would, as there's a guy who doesn't really deserve a fight, but he's a nice guy. So it's almost like when Robert Guerrero fought Mayweather. No one gave Robert Guerrero a chance there, but with his family background, what he's went through in life, you kind of had to, you're rooting for him, right? No one's really rooting for Broner here. And it's actually kind of aggravating to think that how much money he's going to be getting for this, while there's guys who've been, when Porter's been fighting Thurman and Garcia, and Spence is waiting to fight Thurman, and just all these guys trying to circle around each other, but instead the guy who doesn't deserve any sort of shot gets the big money payday. It leaves a sour taste.
Broner always impresses me as a guy who probably doesn't think very much about boxing until the money gets low or until a fight is made and he has to go to training camp. Other than that, it's not on his mind. That's what I think about him. Okay, one last one for all three of you guys. Tell us what's going to happen with Alexander Usyk, who fights Tony Bellew on Saturday, with all four of Usyk's cruiserweight belts on the line. Travis, who do you like in this one and why? Whoops, Travis, gotcha. I think we lost Travis. Okay, John, let's go to you on this.
Oh, I like Usyk. I think it's dangerous in a way to go against Tony Bellew. I mean, I thought David Haye was going to beat him the first time. I thought he had a hell of a shot at beating him the second time. I was obviously way wrong on that. He's gotten the maximum amount of success out of the talent he's gotten, and I actually believe he's improved as he's gotten older. But Usyk's got too much game. He's gonna box. He's gonna punch. He's gonna bring things to the table that Bellew, I don't think, will be able to deal with. Now Bellew will be there though, and see the interesting thing about Usyk is when you've seen him fight, except when he fought this last fight, he usually gets off to a little bit of a slow start. So maybe Bellew's gonna try to pop him early, try to hurt him, and get him out of there early. I don't think it's gonna happen. I think Usyk's going to beat him up and maybe stop him, but a decision seems more likely. But he's just an extraordinary fighter. And he's fun to watch because he comes to fight, and so does Bellew. So, I'm looking forward to that one, but I think Usyk wins it.
Okay. Riz, take us home here. Who do you pick on this one and why?
Got to go with Usyk. I just think he defines what greatness is. I think he's... you got to like a guy like Bellew just because he's a guy who had a second career almost when he did, like a second win in his career, and no one expected it, including himself. So I'm glad he's getting the shot here. I just think Usyk is he's almost a perfect fighter. And I think, funny enough, I think he's actually now entering his prime. I think against Briedis is a good fighter, but I don't think Usyk said he had some issues in camp. I don't think we really kind of know what he was. Now I think he's just like the Gassiev performance was unreal. And just something to think about here. He fought Briedis in Latvia. He fought Gassiev in Russia as a Ukrainian, by the way. So think about that. And now he's fighting Bellew in England. So he's constantly on the road despite being the favorite. I don't remember the last fighter who did that. I don't know if there's ever been a fighter who's done that. The number one guy in the world who's constantly fighting on the road, and not even just on the road, but in the other fighter's backyard. That's unreal. There's no fighter I can think of that's ever done that. Just the confidence you must have to just say, sure, I'll fight in your backyard. And the Gassiev one, I mean, the political implications are even more crazy when you think about it. So I absolutely love that. Watching Alexander Usyk is like watching Lomachenko for me. I absolutely love watching him. I think I think Bellew will pose some problems just because Bellew can punch. But I think Usyk understands that he wants to close the show. I think this time he hasn't knocked out anyone for a while. I think Bellew's tough. But I think there's going to be a late stoppage. I think Usyk stops in around round 11.
Riz, he's coming back down to cruiserweight. Bellew is. Do you think that's a factor?
I think it can be, but it's not like he was. I don't know. He when he went to heavyweight, it's not like he was really adding muscle mass or anything. I think he was just kind of eating more. So he didn't. Again, I don't think he really. I think he was so confident in beating David Haye, shockingly, that I don't think he didn't need to be in like perfect shape. But it's crazy to think that he was a light heavyweight. I have no idea how he managed to make that weight. To be honest, I just think he's going to be in better shape. I think he's going to be a little more prepared to go the distance. I don't think he's going to be tired really necessarily, but he's going up against a completely different animal. Even though he's going to be the bigger fighter, he's never went up against a guy this refined. Bellew's never really looked like a fighter in some ways, but at cruiserweight, I think he's actually more dangerous than any other weight. I just think he's fighting the hardest fight imaginable against the best guy that exists.
All right, that is your boxing fix, Boxing Junkies, from our expert analysts, Travis Hartman, Rizwaan Zahid, John J. Raspanti. Great stuff, guys, as always. Thank you, and we will talk to you next week.
Sounds good, guys.
All right, guys. Take care.
All right. Next up, Paul McLaughlin, our British correspondent, is going to talk about White and Haye and Bellew and Usyk and some other stuff in the heavyweight division. And then we're going to get another history lesson from Christopher James Shelton, who's going to take us back about 240 years to talk about bare-knuckle boxing. All that is straight ahead. We'll be right back right after this.
If you like the Ringside Boxing Show, you're going to love the website, RingsideBoxingShow.com.
Hi, I'm Dennis Taylor, host of the Ringside Boxing Show, where since 2008 we have been continuously sponsored by Garcia Boxing, the first family of the sweet science on California's beautiful Central Coast. Trainers Max and Sam Garcia and ring strategist Dean Hamilton are regarded among the most knowledgeable in the game. And Kathy Garcia, who manages all Garcia boxing fighters, is renowned for her integrity and career guidance, having taken 2 boxers to #1 world rankings. Together they comprise one of the most respected teams in the sport. Learn more by calling 831-261-3214 or send them an email at garciaboxing25@aol.com.
Hi there, it's Paul McLaughlin with your weekly roundup of everything going on in the UK boxing scene. At the moment, we start off with Dillian Whyte, who still has a burning desire to smash David Haye and welcomed the former world champion to come out of retirement for a future fight. The Brixton man has finally agreed a heavyweight rematch against Derek Chisora at the O2 on the 22nd of December, with Haye recently becoming the new manager for his bitter rival. Now, Whyte sparred with Haye in the past and would happily share the ring again with the 38-year-old. And at the press conference this week, midweek to announce the Chisora fight, Whyte questioned why Del Boy had decided to join forces with Haye.
I'm in this game to give the fans proper fights. I'm not in this game to hide and fight journeyman and fight nobody. I want to give the fans nights and remember 50 years after I'm done. And this is one of them, obviously me and Derek's got the right chemistry to get it done. So here we are, and I want to shut him up, The last fight was a good fight. I won by 3 rounds. It was close, but you know, this time I'm definitely going to knock him out. Last time he said he was going to knock me out, it was going to do this and he was going to do that, but, you know, he tried his best and it wasn't good enough. But, you know, it's funny, he said he was a donkey. Derek is actually the real definition of a real lifestyle donkey. You know, he teamed up with David and got a worse deal than what he had before. You know, I don't understand it. You've been in boxing for over 20 years, you know the business, you know it goes, you know everything. Why would you go and give David a easy 25% of your money? Like, what's the point? And get a worse deal. Like,
well, if it's anything like their last fight, it should be a cracker. Elsewhere, but still with David Haye, he believes that Tony Bellew will need something up his sleeve to beat Alexander Usyk. Bellew will aim to end Usyk's perfect 15-fight record and win all 4 major cruiserweight titles on November the 10th. Bellew heads into the most difficult challenge after 2 stoppages of Haye in the heavyweight division, and his one-time enemy believes that he can again overcome long odds. Another person backing Haye is AJ, Anthony Joshua, who claims the fight will be a cracker.
It's a fight that's credible, and I respect Bellew because after that David Haye fight, there was a question, is he going to retire or is he going to carry on? If he's going to carry on, he could have maybe gone a different route, but he's going to fight the best. So he's going to lose weight, put himself through a grueling training camp, and bring them titles back home. So good luck to Bellew. From a supporting aspect, it's always going to be entertaining because I really root for Bellew, so I really want him to win. So my passion is with him regardless, and then from an entertaining point of view, Usyk's really like a perfect boxer. So I hope Bellew's working in his counter punching as well, because that's the way to knock him out. I think he's just kind of let him tippy-tap and get in his rhythm and then just kind of explode. So.
And the main man, Tony Bellew himself, thinks there is no way he will be beaten by Usyk, and says the first time they came face-to-face, he had the Ukrainian's number.
I think he got confused the first time he looked in the eyes, because what he first seen was what he said that he saw was a man who had arrogance, but he confuses arrogance for confidence. He's never looked into a fighter's eyes before and a fighter's looked back at him who truly believes he can beat him. I don't think a big man know I can beat him, and everybody usually looks back into his eyes as a beaten man, and I've looked into fighters' eyes before and beaten them, and he knows he doesn't see that when he sees me. So, you know, I see a winner and I see a fighter at pedigree when I look into his eyes, but ultimately I'm going to find a way on November the 10th. I am going to beat the monster. I'm going to defeat him. You know, he's not going to be able to take it. I'm going to break him.
Right, well, I hope that's going to be a cracking fight next Saturday, and I'll have all the reports for you next week also. In the meantime, gloves up and protect yourselves at all times. Back to you guys in the studio.
Hey, thank you, Paul McLaughlin. Great time for the sport of boxing in the UK for sure. One more quick break, and then we're going to be coming back with our boxing historian, Christopher James Shelton. Stick around. This is great stuff coming up for you.
I'm Dennis Taylor, co-author of the Amazon bestseller Intimate Warfare, the true story of the Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward boxing trilogy. You know, writing this book was a labor of love for John J. Raspanti and myself. We enjoyed every minute of the process and considered it a privilege to tell the tale of one of the most electrifying boxing trilogies in the history of this sport. Intimate Warfare traces the collision course of Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward from their earliest days through their 3 epic fights, as well as the aftermath of this great rivalry, which culminated in one of the greatest friendships in boxing. Intimate Warfare has received a 4.5-star rating from readers and was endorsed by Hall of Famers Harold Letterman and Joe Cortez and 2-time Trainer of the Year Virgil Hunter. Our foreword was written by Ray Boom Boom Mancini, another one of the greatest blood and guts fighters of our time. Get your copy today at Amazon.com.
I don't want you living with roaches.
Welcome to this special edition of the Ringside Boxing Show. I'm Dennis Taylor, and today we are going to offer you another ride in the Wayback Machine with our inimitable boxing historian, Christopher James Shelton, who is going to talk to us about a bare-knuckle fighter from the 18th century, Daniel Mendoza, who was of Portuguese and Jewish descent, but lived and fought in England. He was a big star in England in the late 1700s. Chris, welcome back. First of all, man, how are you?
Trying to do better every day. Don't want to bore the audience, but I've had emergency room visits, intensive care units, operations, but I'm ready to go here. I'm ready to throw punches myself.
Yep, Chris had his gallbladder removed not too long ago, so he's struggling through this today, but he's a trooper, just like Daniel Mendoza was. So, hey, Daniel Mendoza is the reason you became a boxing historian, right? Explain that story.
Yes, it's a very unusual story in that, I always have been doing various things in work, and I like to write poetry and songs and things like that. And naturally, these things weren't really absolutely turning into anything. But one day I was with some friends at the Rhythm Room watching a blues musician, Philip Walker, and we got there early. You can move around the tables, and all of a sudden, I don't know how this topic turned to boxing or sports. I'm a sports junkie. I was just always a sports junkie. I love boxing, and I knew history because I love history too. And they asked something about bare knuckle and stuff, and I started talking about the Daniel Mendoza-John Jackson fight, and then I pushed the tables away and sort of showed all these guys kind of vaguely what happened and sort of what it was like. And it really excited everybody to the point that, I was thrilled about that. And then my friend John Neal said afterwards, he goes, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you write about bouts like this?" And I thought, well, I hadn't really thought about it. And then I just, from there, it sort of trickled of getting information, and so I started becoming really a researcher and writing the history on my own. And then when I had research nuggets, I'd send them to Cyber Boxing Zone and Tracy Callis. And then from there, after getting my nuggets and my research that I would give up, that I'd find, he suggested, they had a sort of a problem and needed somebody to write a story. Said, "Can you write?" I can write. So I wrote a story, and it became a big hit. And then I was doing another newsletter for an organization, and I did a post at a boxing interview, and he posted that without me knowing on Cyber Boxing Zone, and it became an instant hit. So all of a sudden, Cyber Boxing said, "Why don't you write about anything you want?" So I could do research and writing, and then eventually they hooked me up with you, and I get to do interviews. So Danny Mendoza has been a very interesting part of my life.
Yeah, that was, you connected with us, 9-10 years ago, so that must have been, 12, 13 years ago when the barroom thing happened?
Right, yeah, it was quite a few years ago now. It always seems like it wasn't that long ago. Now, we're all getting up there a little bit. We've been doing this for a long time, so yeah, it's probably anywhere near 15 years ago.
We're always curious how you're able to dig up information that you find from so long ago. And in this case, one source apparently was a really rare book from 1789 that was written by Daniel Mendoza?
Yes, he wrote a couple books in his lifetime, which were invaluable, and both of them were trouble to get. But the first book, the Art of Boxing, he wrote in the late 1780s. We'll get to the timeline of where he was at that point. He was a well-known pugilist, but he wasn't considered the best and such. But he wrote about the science of boxing and stuff, and there's only one copy in all of America. So I tried to research, how can I get this thing sent to Phoenix? The answer is you're not. And the only place it has is a Hebrew college in Cincinnati, the one and only copy in all of America. And if when it comes to these old books, it means nobody's going to want you to touch it either. Sometimes if it's old but not that rare, you can go into a room where somebody watches you and you use like a little feather and move the pages over. You're not allowed to get because they don't want you to get your finger ink and finger stuff all over the pages. But this is so rare, they wouldn't even let me do that. So just to hold my historian secret, I did get the book, the entire text, and transferred a lot of it on the internet. So before my story comes out, there's no way to know any of this stuff. But part of what I did was try to induce that if I could receive assistance, it was important not just to keep this guy as a book in Cincinnati, but to try to get the information out there. So I did post a lot of the information I have, and I posted quite a bit of the text itself in the second half of my story, where he actually talks about the boxing techniques of what he does, and it's not theory. It's he called it a science, and it certainly is. This person does this, and this is how you respond. And I put in quite a bit, but there's still quite a bit that I kept out just to know I have it and nobody else, except a bunch of people in Cincinnati who probably don't care.
Okay, so this was bare knuckle fighting, which is was quite different from the sweet science that we know today with the Marquess of Queensberry rules. What were people likely to see in a bare-knuckle fighting match in the 18th century?
Well, I attribute it to, it maybe almost, some people would almost say maybe it's not boxing, though there were boxing punches and such. The rules were different. First of all, there's no weight classes. A small person could fight a big person. That didn't make any difference. There were untimed rounds, so there weren't 3-minute rounds like we have today. A round could be 5 seconds if somebody intentionally fell down, which you're not supposed to do, but people did when they were tired. Or a round could be over 2 hours or over 3 hours if neither one falls down. So a round could be unlimited, and that's what decided. And a round ended when somebody touched the ground in any way. However they touched the ground, that ended the round, and you'd have 30 seconds rest. Some of the things that you could do a wrestling throws were popular. You could choke somebody. That was okay. The only things you really couldn't do was, you couldn't hit somebody in the crotch, no biting, no eye gouging, no kicking, and that each pugilist would have one umpire in their corner, and each one would have a cornerman and an umpire, and that umpire would maybe sometimes make a determination whether they thought there was a foul or not, and if the two umpires disagreed, the two pugilist umpires disagreed, there was a head referee to ultimately decide.
And there weren't any scoring judges, right? This was
right. There was no scoring per round like we have today, which obviously really alters how a boxer fights when it's a fight to the finish versus when you watch someone like Mayweather, who's really isn't going to try to fight for the finish, he's just going to try to pile up each round and win a little bit each round. Well, that doesn't help you in a bare-knuckle fight. So the only thing it influences, because of the English, is that the gambling might change round for round. During that 30 seconds, people will quickly shout, are the odds changing, are the odds changing? But for the pugilist, there was really no benefit to slowly winning around, because all you do is you hit somebody and knock them down, or you use a wrestling throw and throw them down. So obviously you've hopefully injured them and given yourself a benefit, but no, there is no just tapping somebody a couple times and a bell rings. The bell doesn't ring until somebody hits you on the ground and your head is ringing like a bell.
This was a sport that attracted aristocrats of England in the late 1700s, right?
It attracted
a big deal.
Absolutely attracted royalty, hundreds of people, thousands of people, which the London Times, which I know is actually called the Times, there is no London Times, but just to clarify for the audience, they would make fun of it. I mean, they would say, this is ridiculous, it's illegal. And they'd say, how can you have all these people that are part of, royalty showing up to these things and then call it illegal? How can you pretend like it isn't happening or pretend that it isn't wrong? But, boxing was just like it is throughout its history. It attracts a lot of different types of people. You'd be surprised. And King George III would turn into a boxing fan, and he was our enemy in America. Well, if you're an American, he's our enemy, since he tried to extinguish us, and we'd all be having English accents today if he got his way. But anyway, King George III, who was around during that time, he was a boxing fan.
Back in this day, poverty in England was endemic. So if somebody offered to pay you a guinea, which is roughly £1 for a fight, that was like a week's pay for somebody of Daniel Mendoza's class, because he didn't start out as a rich guy.
No, he didn't. But actually, I'm going to both agree and then clarify something. The one thing I'll agree on is obviously that has something to do with almost any kind of bare-knuckle fight. These things were if you can make any kind of money at all, or there were grudge fights and stuff like that. Mendoza actually came from what I guess what I'd call more of a middle-class background. He came from a world where you learned to trade, and that's what you did. You learned it, and then eventually you became the mentor, and you did it for the rest of your life. But Mendoza got bored easily. He thought it was a bland way to live a life, and he really didn't want to do it that way. So he really wouldn't have to turn to pugilism for just to escape poverty, but he did it to not only escape boredom, but that he wanted to be kind of a star. He wanted to be famous, and you're not going to be famous, doing a trade.
He must have been a real bright guy, as a guy who wrote books and stuff.
Yeah, a very literate guy, and the guy we'll eventually get to is also pretty literate. Sometimes there's an impression about boxers not being, all that, this or that. But anyway, Mendoza was a very bright guy, certainly bright enough to write 2 books, and he wrote many letters to newspapers to exclaim his point for the moment. He was sort of a humorless guy, but he definitely was very literate.
Okay, so he was born in 1764 in a place called Aldgate, London. How old was he when he had his first bare-knuckle fight?
He was only 16 years old, and it's a very interesting bout because obviously because I managed to get both books. The other book that Mendoza wrote later on, like 1812 or in that area. Incidentally, I can tell a story on that one really quick. It's just that Arizona State did actually have it. They just didn't have it in their library, so I just had to get it from a warehouse into the other library section, so I was able to look at that a lot easier. But anyway, he was 16 years old, and he was already a small guy in his prime at 5'7", 165 pounds, so he might have even weighed a little bit less, but he took on a giant guy named Porter. Porter didn't want to pay a debt involving Mendoza's employer, so Mendoza said, all right, well, we'll fight, and Mendoza was a little bit happy because in these things what happens is, people gather around a fight pretty quickly, and they'll throw a little bit of money your way, and they'll start gambling, a little bit of money goes your way. So for Mendoza at 16, he managed to knock out this guy or cause Porter to concede or surrender, and Porter's much bigger. And the interesting thing about that is Mendoza almost right from the get-go had some sort of ideas of a strategy of fighting somebody that's much larger, since everybody he fought was larger, and usually you kind of get pummeled in the earliest fights until you learn, but he seemed almost from the get-go to have pretty good instincts of what these bigger guys were doing. And of course, the one thing he had going for him, if you and we watched fights of the early George Foreman or Sonny Liston or even Mike Tyson in his early days, you knew exactly what they were going to do. They didn't even pretend to have a strategy against you. So Mendoza would have time to figure out, hey, this guy's just going to do the same thing every single time, and then sort of adjust of, what can I do? Since I know, it's like looking at the other person's poker hand. A lot of times that won't work against a bigger guy. A lot of guys didn't beat Foreman or Tyson or Liston, but Mendoza would adjust to a bigger pugilist and get the advantage of him.
So, Chris, who was Richard Humphreys, and how did he figure into Mendoza's life?
Well, Humphreys was really the best fighter, and as far as popularity, his fame and tension and stuff. It's really, he was a big guy, a good sense of humor. He was also literate. He wasn't pretending to be, he just happened to be a bright guy in general, and a much better sense of humor than Mendoza. And he would usually fight if he thought he was disrespected and stuff. He didn't really enjoy being a pugilist. He really didn't even do it necessarily for money. He just would back up his reputation, almost like when you watch these fictional movies of a Western where a gunslinger goes into town and challenges another gunslinger, which that stuff didn't really happen. But people really would be like a gunslinger with Richard Humphreys. People would sometimes want to antagonize him into a fight, and if he felt that his pride was on the line, he would do it. And he noticed, right away when he saw Mendoza, in these earliest bouts, that, oh, look at this guy. This guy's pretty clever. He's not, he's small, and he's taking on bigger guys, and so right away he liked Mendoza and thought, wow, this guy's already a better skilled fighter as far as a thinker than pugilists who are older or more experienced.
You alluded to this earlier, but these fights did not have time limits. So Mendoza lost a 75-minute fight to Tom Tyne, and then he won a 150-minute victory over John Matthews. What was it that Humphrey said about Mendoza's style?
He just said that this guy is a thinker, and that again, with most of these pugilists, they just had an approach. Humphrey's approach was along the lines of these others. He would have time. He didn't really do like Mendoza was having these sort of spontaneous fights, while Humphreys would like to have a little time to say, all right, I'll challenge you, and then we'll set a date and do this. And Humphreys, great physical shape, do some exercise, such like that. And he noticed that Mendoza was fighting with strategy. He's doing these wrestling holds that clearly he was waiting. He saw that when Mendoza didn't, most guys were offensive and they wanted to go after you. He noticed that Mendoza was a defensive person. He liked to react. He liked to counter whatever you were doing. So right away, again, Humphreys liked Mendoza and also thought, wow, this guy's a lot different than any of the other pugilists around, who were much bigger but not very clever.
Yeah, you alluded to this earlier too. Mendoza was kind of an attention seeker, was he not? He actually thought his true calling might be as a stage actor.
He did. That's why I said that he could just never be happy with the trade, and he did excite in these early fights that it was getting attention. A crowd would gather. He liked the money part. Anything that came his way, but he also liked the attention. So yes, part of them thought that he could be an actor, singer, and he did a play about a Jewish queen, Esther, with a couple of his friends. They took the stage. Mendoza said he was much more nervous doing this than ever fighting. He didn't like to admit to nerves, but he was nervous, and he went out there and sang, and everybody started booing and heckling him, It was so bad that they couldn't even get through the performance because they were throwing things at Mendoza and his friends, and so they left the stage, and then Mendoza went to get paid, and the theater manager was like, "Are you insane?" after that performance. So then Mendoza stole something as his payment, which unfortunately would be a pattern with Mendoza and would get him in trouble in the future. But he did learn. I'm not a singer, but I am an entertainer, and I want to be an entertainer. And boxing started becoming more attractive in that because of stuff like that.
Okay, so we know that pugilists of the day were not exactly held in high esteem. Where did stage actors rank on that pecking order?
Probably about the same thing, probably pretty bad. But pugilists probably were lower even than stage actors because at least stage actors weren't regarded as sort of animals who only survive, via their fists, and so probably someone like a Mendoza or a Humphreys, without people knowing them, they would be wrong to judge that they're not that smart because of what they do. While theater people are just sort of disgusting, but they dress nice.
Okay, so this guy Daniel Mendoza temporarily derailed his entertainment career dreams for trade work with a tobacconist who actually decided to back him as a 5-to-1 underdog in a fight against a big guy. What's the rest of that story?
Well, that's a very interesting thing because he had to go back to a trade job, which made him miserable. He didn't want to do it, but then the employer, when he got to hear stories about Mendoza's fighting, and that Mendoza obviously brags, but Mendoza had reason to brag. He said, "Well, I want to see this," and he put him up against the larger foe, and the other guy was called a 5-to-1 underdog. So the employer, laid down some money on this. And so Mendoza was happy. Mendoza did win the fight, again, fairly, easy under the circumstances. He's a patient guy. Mendoza waits to tire you down. And so Mendoza did get some money, thrown his way by the employer, appreciative that he did this. And but what he noticed is, hey, the employer made a lot more money off this fight than me. He goes, he made more money from Daniel Mendoza than I did being Daniel Mendoza. So what Daniel Mendoza started to learn from it was that if it's his name and he's the one going out there and fighting, he should get a bigger stake of the money, which he never quite pulled it off completely, but that definitely was his mindset, is I'm in this for money too, not just entertainment.
Okay, so tell us the story about the time Mendoza fought 3 times in the same day. Why did he do that?
He did each one progressively as a grudge match. The first one started out purely as a grudge match. So they both put up 1 guinea, and Mendoza won. But then when he came out of it, after people had tipped him, the gamblers had tipped him. He had his 1 guinea bet turned into over 6 pounds. And that's a pretty big jump from what you started. So then he the second time around intentionally got into a grudge fight the same day, and this time around he won again, 2 fights in 1 day, and this time around he did the same thing, a 1 guinea bet, and it turned into over 14 pounds. So now all of a sudden he's gambled 2 guineas, hasn't lost those, which he kept his eye on, and over 20 pounds, and so he started a 3rd fight, a 3rd grudge thing. And after that, he won, more money in his pocket. Now, he didn't make as much money. He made the most money from the second one, so he didn't say how much he made in the 3rd one, but he sort of started out the day without anything, and the next thing you know, he's got something like, 30 pounds are in that area in his pocket, and so he went out and had lavish entertainment, a great meal, and said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a fighter.
That turned into one of his favorite stories to tell for the rest of his life, huh?
Oh yeah, absolutely. A few fights in one day, and it wasn't a stunt. It was just something that it's the way it worked out, and that he, as he said, he started realizing that hey, I can make some serious money, doing this. Even though the gamblers were the ones making the serious money, but he can make more than as a trade.
Okay, so Mendoza fought some guy named William Nelson, and he was a 10-1 underdog at fight time. What happened during the fight, and why was it a pivotal moment in the history of the sport?
Well, it's because there's a lot of chaos that went on before that fight, but that was probably one because, again, it started out, Mendoza had a lot of drama with Humphreys, which we'll get to leading into the fight, but with the odds at 10-1, a lot of gamblers started putting money on it, and all of a sudden the money that could be made from these things started getting a little bit crazy, because also a lot of people were showing up, so Mendoza, again, with a lot of drama going in, which we'll get to, he managed to win this fight, and it made a name for himself because this William Nelson had a name. So now the money looked a lot more attractive, and also Mendoza was having a name that was getting out to a lot of different people.
Okay, so Richard Humphreys, who we talked about earlier, had a falling out with Mendoza. What happened between those two?
Well, it's 100% Mendoza's fault. And here Humphreys had been really good to mentoring him, even sometimes in his corner, in his earliest fights, when, possibly Mendoza could win the fight, but the gamblers don't want to pay, or somebody wants to beat him up because he's not a street fighter. Well, Humphreys, could fight either way. So Humphreys had protected him, been a mentor toward him. So when there was going to be the fight against Nelson, Humphreys acted as a mentor and said, Humphreys had a sponsor when he wanted to fight. He said, I'll introduce you to my sponsors. And the sponsor forwarded 20 pounds, for Mendoza's training at this hotel, and then Mendoza just decided he wasn't going to pay the guy back. He said, no, this isn't a loan, this is a gift. And then Mendoza started being a brat about the whole thing, saying that, these training, first of all, he didn't like Humphreys as a trainer. Humphreys was also acting as a trainer, but Humphreys always emphasized physical training. And Mendoza said, no, I win with my brain. And I'm young, I've got a lot of energy. So when he decided, when he fought Nelson, he made quite a bit of money. He still wouldn't pay back the 20 pounds, and that was it. Humphreys was furious at him. He grabbed him at one point, shook him around, and said, pay this guy, and he didn't. And then Mendoza wound up in jail over it, because then it became a theft. Even though he had won more money, he could have paid back the money. He just didn't want to. And then he said Meyer, somebody else paid the 20 pounds off, and then Mendoza got out of jail. But among other things, he claimed that, Humphreys has put me into a sleeve-back hotel, and at night it's prostitutes and clients fighting with each other, and I can't sleep with all that going on. That's what he wrote in his book, so that's not, but anyway, it was hard for Humphreys to get a read on Mendoza, because Mendoza usually did that. He'd do the wrong thing, and then he didn't care. He always played victim, and then he'd give you 4 or 5 stories of why he's doing the wrong thing, so you could never really tell, other than if you put money in his hand, he didn't want to give it back. That became a Mendoza trait.
Talking to Christopher James Shelton on the Ringside Boxing Show. I'm Dennis Taylor. Chris has been with us for about 10 years as a boxing historian. So Chris, Humphreys and Mendoza, this kind of turned into a fight feud. They ended up fighting a trilogy, right?
Yeah, they fought a trilogy, but they even had, again, a couple battles before that. Not professional ones, like the first one I told you, where he grabbed Mendoza and shook him around and said, you're going to pay this guy back. And Mendoza's like, no, I'm not going to pay it back. And then Mendoza had a fight in between there, which is kind of like an important one to mention. Martin, the Bath Butcher, they called him. Because that fight, Mendoza earned over what would be in the 1780s over $2,000. In the 1780s. It was 1,000 pounds, and I'm just doing 2 for 1. And meanwhile, one of the gamblers on him made 80,000. What would be 80,000 a day or 40,000 pounds in the 1780s. So a lot of money would be made, and Humphreys just didn't understand why Mendoza wouldn't pay this guy back. So he ambushed Mendoza. He knew Mendoza was traveling around and went to an inn, and Mendoza shows up at the inn not knowing Humphreys is there, and this time Humphreys called him some names, and Mendoza called him some names back, and they did exchange punches, but believe me, Mendoza did not want to have that kind of a fight with Humphreys. Humphreys would have killed him in a street fight, and again demanding that he give back this money. And then Mendoza and Humphreys decided that they would go ahead and turn it into an official bout against one another.
Okay, so generally Mendoza is viewed as an English bare-knuckle champion. Is that right?
Yes, he is, even though he's of Portuguese descent, and it's just very interesting, and maybe not even important. He's not really that beloved or embraced by the Hispanic or Latino community, even though he's such a great Latino champion, but he is very much embraced by the Jewish community.
Okay, 1795, Mendoza defends his title in an infamous bout with a guy named John Jackson. Tell us about this fight.
Well, I probably should go over the 3 fights with Humphreys, even if I
go ahead.
A little
sure.
bit.
Sure.
All right, let's see. I'll just try to get through them. Let's see. Number 1, it became a highly publicized bout because both of them had names, and now they have this grudge match going back and forth. And in that fight, when it finally happened, Mendoza was really getting the best of it for the early rounds. And the early parts and countering and stuff, and knocking Humphreys down and throwing him with wrestling holds, which must have surprised Humphreys. But somewhere around the 9th minute, it was a slippery surface, and Mendoza sort of lost his balance, so Humphreys was able to get a hold of him and just threw him on his head. And Mendoza was able to get up from that and sort of, again, start winning for the next few minutes and getting Humphreys down. But then when Mendoza tried to kick Humphreys toward a corner, again, he sort of couldn't get his grip right on a wrestling throw, and then Humphreys was able to get a hold of him and threw him on his head again. And this time he had wrenched Mendoza's head hurt, he'd wrenched his back, and when Mendoza tried to get up and continue fighting, Humphreys was landing combinations, and Mendoza fell again, and this time he claimed his ankle didn't work, and so he withdrew, he surrendered. So Humphreys won the first bout, and it became a hit. I mean, for Richard Humphreys not to be in the International Hall of Fame is ridiculous. Richard Humphreys was a star. They were putting Richard Humphreys mugs, Richard Humphreys embroideries, Richard Humphreys everything, Richard Humphreys... Really? Yeah, and Humphreys was making no money off this. Now, Mendoza would have been really upset knowing all these people making money off his name. Humphreys didn't really care, and as far as Humphreys was concerned, he didn't want to do this anymore. But then Mendoza started getting into his head of, hey, if we do this again, it could be turned into a big spectacle, and a lot of people want to watch it. Plus, Mendoza had his own pride and stuff, so he goaded Humphreys through what would really be influential in how boxing is marketed even today by writing a real nasty thing about Humphreys being a chicken, how the ground beat him, not really Humphreys, and challenging Humphreys to fight, and Humphreys would reply back, don't even tempt me, you worm, I know you're scared of me, and I know that. And Mendoza would do it again, and again, Humphreys would keep replying. And the interesting thing about the literary battle between the two, which was played out in the papers and then get everybody excited about, would they fight again, was, again, how literate both are and how humorous Humphreys is, because Humphreys took this a lot, not as a joke, but he just had more of a sly sense of humor. So Mendoza had taken that fight and the fame to open his own boxing school. So he had his own students, and he charged people to go into the fights, so he was making a little bit of money now, running his own place. And Humphrey shows up one day with his friends, and they all pay the money to get in, because they're all looking for Mendoza, who's trying to run around and pretend he wasn't there. But anyway, Mendoza eventually came out, and Humphrey on the spot said, you look a little afraid of me. Well, let's fight right now. We'll fight for free. And Mendoza's like, no, I can't do that. My ankle hurts. My back hurts. I'm ready for you, but not now. My doctor won't clear it, blah, blah, blah. And so Mendoza was very embarrassed to have to, back down like that in front of his own people. But he gave Humphreys their money back, and then he got out of there. So by the time the fight took off, this is when he wrote his book. He wrote the book, the first book, The Art of Science, The Art of Boxing, before that second fight. It was really almost, again, promotion for it and showing all his techniques. So the second fight takes place, probably one of the biggest, highly publicized fights probably ever when you consider the mass numbers that were involved. And this time Mendoza took the advantage right away. The first 3 rounds, it was everything his book said. Humphreys stepped out, he'd lost some weight. They actually looked a little closer together. Mendoza had actually gained a little bit of weight since his first fight with Humphreys, and Humphreys had decided to do what he knew, which was diet, get in training, be in physical shape. So Humphreys came in there in good shape, and the first 3 rounds were exactly the same. Humphreys would step out, come out aggressive, throw a hard punch. Mendoza would block it. As small as he is, he'd block it, and then counter, hit Humphreys, and knock him down. And the whole fight, the second fight, turned into something like that, where Mendoza was really just outclassing Humphreys until Humphreys finally had to concede. And it was a big win for Mendoza because he finally backed up all that talk, all that boasting. And so then there was finally a third fight eventually, and this time it was no contest. Mendoza almost embarrassed Humphreys. It's always like one fight too many, and that was probably one fight too many for Humphreys. And this time Humphreys was also confused. He knew that you realize sometimes, like Sonny Liston with Muhammad Ali, kind of in the first fight by the 5th or 6th round, you're confused by this guy, and you're really not sure what to do, and your instincts are only to throw punches, and this guy keeps knocking you down or grabbing your arm and throwing you to the ground on wrestling holds. So the third fight was pretty easy for Mendoza to win. And I guess now it'll lead up to the John Jackson fight. And John Jackson was not really that particularly special a pugilist. If there were people being called the champions at the time, it would have been Humphreys was really the star attraction. It would have been Tom Johnson, and Tom Johnson was not really, I don't think, as good as he fought some bigger guys, and I could see that there was some cheating and stuff going on in Johnson's fights, which sometimes was actually aided by Humphreys, who's a corner man. So I'm sometimes a little dubious of Tom Johnson as champion. Tom Johnson lost in 1791 to Benjamin Brain, and in that fight, interestingly enough, Tom Johnson was grabbing, when he got desperate, grabbing Benjamin Brain's hair. So then Benjamin Brain did win the fight. Tom Johnson conceded, and Benjamin Brain was now declared the champion, and Benjamin Brain died 3 years later without having fought again. And so there's, at 1795, there's an opening. So now this is when Daniel Mendoza was regarded as champion. But so far we haven't really talked about anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism could definitely be at work, because one of the things that's clear about English bare knuckle, which I wish they clean it up, is some of these really great fighters, these tough fighters in English history, were robbed and cheated because mostly the gamblers, and their place in history is just completely forgotten, while the guys who did the cheating went to the International Hall of Fame. So yes, when Mendoza fought John Jackson in 1795, it was regarded as a championship bout, but I think it was regarded as a championship bout because of the results. My opinion is if Daniel Mendoza had won the fight, they would have said, oh, now it wasn't a championship fight. But if he loses the fight, oh, well, yes, it was a championship fight, because they were using Mendoza's reputation to give it credibility. And someone like King George III, well, he of course wanted, John Jackson to win, and couldn't. I think he probably respected Danny Mendoza as a pugilist, but he was probably right. This guy doesn't make for a good court boxer. So anyway, the fight takes place and it's over in less than 10 minutes. The strategy of John Jackson was really the worst kind of strategy possible. Was if you let this thing go on very long, Mendoza's going to take the advantage because he tries to tire you out. So John Jackson decided to be sort of hyper-aggressive with Mendoza, and then Mendoza was really sort of getting the best of it early on, and Jackson realized he was in trouble, so he used his size, his girth, and he kind of pushed Mendoza toward the ropes and the rail, and finally he had him sort of pinned against the rail and the ropes so that Mendoza couldn't fall down intentionally and couldn't really move. And Jackson, with that, grabbed his hair, and Mendoza had kind of longer hair, and he got a clamp on his hair. Once he had a clamp on Mendoza's hair, he started maneuvering his body weight so that he could have him pinned and hold him in the hair with one hand. So then when he finally did that, he now freed one of his hands, and with the free hand just started beating Mendoza to the face over and over and over again, just pummeling him more. And Mendoza couldn't fall, he couldn't move, he couldn't do anything, until finally Jackson lost his grip, and Mendoza fell to the ground, and that ended the round. And Mendoza only lasted a few more minutes. I mean, when I say a few more minutes, I mean literally 2 or 3 minutes, not 6 or 7 minutes. And by then Jackson knew, again, I got to take this guy out, so started landing some hard punches right away. And that was it. John Jackson was now the champion, and Jackson never fought again, though he became a favorite of King George. He became King George's boxer, and claimed to hold the title for another 5 years without fighting.
So what happened to Mendoza? What did he do for the rest of his life?
Well, originally he kind of did something clever and opened up his own. He finally did what he wanted to do. He opened up his own stage show, sort of. He had pupils and people coming in like sort of a traditional boxing training ground. But now he opened it up into an entertainment. And he had 3 parts here. I wrote them down so I can remind myself here. He brought in a paid pugilist, and he and Mendoza would spar, and then Mendoza, while he was sparring, would tell the audience, this is what we do, kind of going over like his book. These are techniques in sparring. So you'd watch him spar a little bit, and then Mendoza would explain to you the art of boxing science. And then the second part of the show would be comedy. And Mendoza apparently was very good at mimicking these famous boxers of the day: Benjamin Brain, Tom Johnson, Richard Humphreys. I guess he was at least pretty good at mimicking him and stuff. But anyway, the second part was comedy with Mendoza on the stage. This time the audience isn't heckling or throwing things at him. And the third part would be almost like what's that show? What's My Line? Where they bring on a celebrity person at the end, and Mendoza would bring on a celebrity pugilist usually at the end, and they would briefly spar and such. And one time he brought in Richard Humphreys as the celebrity, pugilist, and the crowd really loved it, and I guess Humphreys, and Mendoza were okay with each other, and unfortunately, with Mendoza is he had a habit of not paying back his debts, and he also would use his money and get credit on it, and then get credit on top of the credit, and the next thing you know, he was in debt. He was in debt before the John Jackson fight, and that's probably one of the reasons he was goaded into fighting somebody that this thing could be rigged against him a little bit, because that was the only way to get him out of jail. And then unfortunately after the Jackson stuff, he had more problems with credit and debt and being put in jail repeatedly, debtor's prison. And John Jackson is actually, they called him the gentleman John Jackson. One of the things Jackson did, so Mendoza forgave him completely, was Jackson did forward him money. While Mendoza was no longer in his prime, could no longer really do so much to make money, so he did try to help pay his debts, and John Jackson was very popular with the royal, obviously, King George III, and when he passed on, John Jackson still remained part of the boxing scene, as the Tom Cribbs came over and took over, and Jem Belcher's. And so the other thing that's probably worth mentioning is when Jem Belcher took over as the champion in 1800, I like Jem Belcher. Jem Belcher was a good pugilist, and he decided he was willing to fight Danny Mendoza for a title chance. So Mendoza almost had one more chance, but the sponsors and the people that be, I don't think they liked Mendoza, period, and they may not have wanted a Jewish champion. So Mendoza was denied, and they basically put pressure on Jem Belcher to take somebody else in debtor's prison, Henry Pierce, and fight him instead. So that was kind of Mendoza's last opportunity for, redemption in that sense. It would be nice if Mendoza never fought again, but he did fight sort of sadly later in his life where he got, beat up senseless. And it's one of those things like when you see Joe Louis wrestling, where it's kind of sad, the person you just wished hadn't done that, but they did. And finally, the last really, again, Mendoza did publish another book in that time, and then by about 1820, they finally held a benefit for him, and Tom Cribb was there, and John Jackson was there, and tried to raise some funds for Mendoza, and Mendoza was, I'm sure he was happy they were giving him money, but as usual, he was pretty angry. He goes, I want it to be known that I'm the father of the science of boxing, and that I want to be remembered that way. And he said, if it wasn't for me and Richard Humphreys, boxing wouldn't be anything like it is today. And he is right. Between him and Richard Humphreys, they really raised the profile of boxing, and displayed to this day ever since. You hear the sweet science, that really all stems down on Mendoza and Mendoza's way of talking. And boxing people take pride today, as Mendoza did, that this isn't just guys going out there and throwing punches. These are thinkers. This is chess with violence, as Ken Norton would say. And Mendoza was very proud of that. And eventually it did influence guys like Joe Kowinski and people over the years who were able to access his book, that, wow, this guy thinks when he fights. And so that's probably Mendoza's legacy.
So you've got an Italian friend, Federica, who went to a special effort to draw a picture of that first bout between Mendoza and Humphreys. Where did she get that inspiration?
Well, I really appreciate it. Her name's Federica, and she lives in Roma. And yes, actually, what she did, one of the things, since I couldn't touch that 1789 book, I got a hold of it, but I didn't touch it. But the second book, the one I got from the ASU warehouse, that one I was able to get the librarian to scan a picture that was in it, and it was from a 1789 woodblock, and the 1789 woodblock of Humphrey's first fight with Mendoza when Humphreys won. And then Federica is a brilliant artist, so I sent her the scan, and she came out with this sort of magnificent modern interpretation of that picture. So when you see that picture, it's one of my favorites. In fact, it's the cover of my second book, Bare Knuckle, covering Mendoza and that whole period. At Amazon, $5.99, everybody. But it's brilliant. It modernized it. A lot of times you look at these old boxing things, it looks like silly drawings or old people, doing something a long time ago. And she put them it's almost like they're in a modern world with their sort of art tricks. So it was just brilliant. I used it for the cover of my second book, and I really appreciate her efforts in that. A rare book of a 1789 woodblock, so it's not the easiest thing to get a hold of or do.
While we're talking about your books, you've got more than one. Tell people about that.
Sure. So the first book I wrote, Federica did the cover for that too on Tom Molyneux, even though Molyneux's not in that particular book. It's called Boxing in the Time of Christ, and it's about boxing before Jesus from Nazareth was born. So more than 10,000 years before Jesus is born is where this first bout takes place. Homer was the writer, and you got Virgil as a boxing writer, and a lot of people just don't know how much boxing resembled modern boxing before Jesus was born. When Jesus, there was a great champion in Jesus' time, Democritus, three-time Olympian. Boxing was much more like it is now when Jesus was alive and before Jesus was born than in the Daniel Mendoza era, which is 1,800 years later, 1,800 years later, when bare knuckle looks kind of very different than what we would see in boxing today. That's my first book. My second book is Bare Knuckle. Covers the period of all the way to the very end, 1722, where Elizabeth Wilkinson Stokes and James Figg, were prominent. Though I don't think Figg actually boxed. That's one of the strange things that turned into a myth. Anyway, it ends with Don L. Sullivan, Jake Corain, 1889, final bare knuckle fight, and why it was banned, and then that's a great story. I won't even. We've done it before, we'll do it again. But anyway, the bare knuckle book's the second one. The third book is Sylvia Allard, Slave Boxer, and it covers, she's a slave fighter and who used boxing techniques, and she was literally a slave as she did it, and it covers really the scene of black boxers in America from the 1880s all the way into the early 20th century. So you have guys like Professor Hadley, George Godfrey, Peter Jackson, Frank Childs, and everyone seems to love Sylvia Dubois, who's the main star of the book. And that was by my French friend Sylvia Allard, who did the drawing for that book. And the fourth book, again, was by Federica, is Boxing Historian, My Life Before Death. And that's just my life story, how I became a boxing historian, how I fumbled around figuring out what to do in life, and then got diagnosed with mental illness, and then became really stupid and became a crystal meth addict, and then got turned around and became a newsletter editor and started doing boxing stuff, and then the boxing stuff just took up more and more of my life, and I'm really glad I've met great people like you and John and Irish Joe in his time, and a lot of other people, Tracy Callis, and so it's been a wonderful world and a journey. But I have to say that because of all the surgery stuff, that I have been in a lot of pain, and in August I was only a few days away from death, apparently. So I thought, why not write down what happened? So it starts out in my high school journal, and then 35 years later in the lives of all these people. Though, unfortunately, all my friends in high school read it, and now they're not my friends anymore. They say, why did you tell that? We don't tell our kids the truth. We tell them we walked 6 miles in snow just to get to school. Yeah. I'm like, no, I think you guys were crashed out and we were getting some JD and Bacardi. But anyway, that's the fourth book, and and there are boxing stories mixed in along the way, to like the Tommy Morris interview and a lot of other stuff that's not in the first 3 books, so you could just see the progress of how a person becomes a boxing historian.
Okay, so one more thing. Some of Mendoza's paraphernalia may have been stolen, and you've got a personal story about that.
Yeah, so a couple of interesting things that happen when you write a story and you don't know who's out there. There's even people that have Facebook accounts with my name and my picture, and it's not me, so you never know what's going to come out there. And some of the things I get are from criminals, and a criminal wrote me about Mendoza that says he has stuff, and he listed documents and stuff, which he's right. I'm the person that could look at it pretty quickly and determine what's going on, and there's no way this person has it as a collector, so he either had to figure out a way to try to copy these things, which again isn't easy because it's like I'm going into a museum where you can't touch anything, so it's not like you really have access to it in your hands, or he somehow produced fakes, or he stole stuff. And the only thing I can gather from the location, if he stole Mendoza stuff, it would be very, very valuable, especially to the Jewish community. I'd almost think too bad, not the Portuguese community, because you'd think they want to adopt Mendoza as one of their own too, or even the English community, since he's an English fighter. But if the stuff was stolen, I gather it was probably from the Washington D.C. area. So I don't know over the years if any, what happened involving all that, other than the person realized that I'm not a crook and I'm not going to help you, commit some kind of crime like this. But I didn't get law enforcement involved in stuff because I thought, oh, God, I think I asked Tracy Callis for advice. He said, oh, don't get mixed up with all these people. They're just going to take up your time and screw up your life. So that's probably good advice. And then the other thing that happened with Mendoza was they were going to make a movie and give me credit for it because I guess they thought that they got a lot of their information, which they probably had to unless they get a hold of that book, get a hold of certain things. And, of course, once I put it on the Internet, it's a lot easier to get a hold of. So a movie's going to be made the second time they make a movie involving my stuff. And I guess with these movies, the story is a lot of times the funding dries up. It doesn't happen. So twice my boxing movies that I wasn't going to write or anything, but that they came partly from Mendoza and partly from Jack Johnson. That didn't happen. So, but it's still an interesting ride. You're dealing with crooks. You're dealing with people with dreams in movies, and all kinds of people when you write a story who come out of the woodwork for good or bad. So people that write me too and say, "Oh, thank you for writing that. That I really enjoyed it," and that means a lot to me. I would take that over an Amazon sale just to hear somebody say, "I read it and I really enjoyed it, and I think you did a good job."
Yep, that's why we do this stuff. Absolutely. And by the way, you are in it for the money a little bit. If people want any of your 4 books, I would say just go to Amazon and do a search for Christopher James Shelton, Shelton, and put in probably boxing, huh? It'll pop right up.
Absolutely, and I especially say since we're doing Mendoza, the second book, Bare Knuckle, you are never going to find a better Bare Knuckle book out there. It covers, again, another person he influenced was Yankee Sullivan before Kowinski and stuff, so you'll see the pattern, and I actually show you the fights and how they happened so that you get an idea of the style of the boxer by reading the point, counterpoint, the counter, and how people fought. So I really made a real effort so that you could go through it and not like an encyclopedia, but get a real flavor of the best boxers. Not always the nicest guys. Some are. Richard Humphries is a pretty nice guy when all said and done, but some are pretty nasty, and didn't matter to me. It's just what happened inside the ring.
You know what I'm going to think about when I lay in bed tonight, thinking about our conversation today, is that in the 1790s, you could buy a mug that had what, Richard Humphries' image on it?
Yeah, or even clock or all sorts of things. It's sort of just like just like if Hillary, I can't shows how out of touch I am. Hillary Duff or whoever the new person is like that, with all these girls who buy all this stuff, or the Olsen twins, everybody would buy all this stuff. So Richard Humphries, when he's a star, his face is on everything, and everybody's making stuff off Richard Humphries. Though again, the difference between Mendoza and Humphries was Humphries just sort of took it all like I don't know what to think about it, while Mendoza would have thought, hey, why should somebody else be making money off me instead of me?
That was in the 1790s, folks. 1780s, 1790s. I guarantee you learned something today from Christopher James Shelton. Man, amazing stuff as always, Chris. No other boxing historian quite like you in the whole world. that I know about, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the Ringside Boxing Show.
Well, hopefully Dr. Freeze will keep me alive today, so we're going to do another one coming up soon.
Amazing stuff, as always, from Christopher James Shelton. There is no other boxing historian quite like Chris in the whole world that I know about, and it's always a pleasure to have him on the Ringside Boxing Show. He's been part of our cast here since the very beginning. So that's going to do it for today's special edition of the Ringside Boxing Show, and we want to encourage you to check out the regular edition of this show, which generally gets posted every Sunday evening at about 9 p.m. Pacific on thegruelingtruth.net. Also, if you're a hardcore boxing fan and you haven't yet discovered the #1 website in the world for daily boxing news, you are missing out. We update ringsideboxingshow.com 365 days a year with the hottest breaking news and the most interesting stories every single day. This should be your first stop every day and might be the only website you need to visit for your boxing fix. ringsideboxingshow.com. Check it out right now. So thanks again to our featured guest today, boxing historian Christopher James Shelton, and thanks to you, Ringside Nation, for being a part of our worldwide audience again today. Keep your chin tucked, and we will talk to you again next Sunday on the Ringside Boxing Show.
Great day for me to whoop somebody's ass.